Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cipher Brief Digital Studio. I'm editor-writer Ethan Masupal. Today, we're going to be covering a topic concerning the US-China trade war, specifically looking at the critical minerals aspect, and particularly how that might impact US military supply chains. And joining me to discuss that is Dan Blumenthal. He is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and an expert in US-China relations. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dan, critical minerals have been sort of a central part of the US China trade war, with China imposing export controls over its critical minerals for the US. So, what is the risk that you're seeing in that aspect to US military supply chains?
Well, there are two different kinds of risks. One is direct and one is indirect. So the actual minerals that the Chinese have put export restrictions on actually mostly do not go directly into military products and technologies, with the exception of antimony. But the other restrictions they put on, which is gallium and germanium, they indirectly affect military supply chains because they affect semiconductor and microelectronic supply chains.
Right.
The bottom line is military demand for both rare earth elements and then other critical minerals that where the Chinese dominate production and refining and mining in some cases. The military demand isn't that big, actually. It's in other industries that could affect national security and from which the military buys that are affected.
I see. So, not necessarily thinking of weapon systems in particular, but maybe dual use products and then just other products that the military relies on, correct?
Well, some of the rare earth elements do affect, and other minerals do affect armaments and missiles and munitions, but not to the levels where the DoD is panicking and their stockpiles and so forth. But many of the both the minerals, the critical minerals, and the rare earth elements as well affect dual use capabilities, from semiconductors to electronics to even energy storage.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsecedge.com.
So, taking a step back here, and when we're talking about this, because there is new reports and both industry and officials are sort of raising alarm over this, but this isn't a new problem, correct? I understand that Japan went through a similar dilemma in 2010. Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. So the first time that people who watch and execute policy towards China paid attention to this was in 2010, when the Chinese authorities held back on the export of some rare earth elements to Japan after a dispute, a fishing dispute essentially, and a territorial dispute in the East China Sea. That was back in 2010. It turned out that rare earth elements and critical minerals are not actually so rare. The reason that they're rare and that their vulnerabilities is it's just that China dominates the mining, the processing, and has built up an industry second to none in processing and refining of both these minerals and the rare earth elements. Unfortunately, since 2010, when the market did react, and mining facilities and operations in other countries, including in the United States, Mountain Pass and so forth, said, we too can do this mining and we can do the refining and so forth, but the industry never really was built up. So So the reason they're still rare is because the market response, while there was an initial market response, the policy response that should have accompanied that market response lagged or just was absent. So there really hasn't been a number of policies or government intervention to fix the problem, and therefore they still are rare, and we still are very dependent on China.
Right. So, can you talk about some of the alternative sources that the U.S. can turn to for critical minerals and rare earths?
Yeah, I mean, so the United States can look to itself. It can look to Canada. It can look to Australia. Depends which minerals we're talking about. There's certainly a lot of lithium, for the EV storage and the EV supply chain in Argentina and other places. If you're talking about cobalt, then the Congo is very important. Nickel is Indonesia. Now the problem, there's a couple problems. One is that China dominates the investment and running and operation of some of those mines and facilities that I mentioned, from the Congo to increasingly to Indonesia in nickel, and then there's more of a competition in Argentina and other places. But even more so, China doesn't just dominate the mining. Most of these minerals and elements have to go back to China, even if they're mined in an allied country. They have to be refined and processed into the metal in China. China has the industry, the industrial capacity. They built up the industrial capacity to do that. So the United States could have alternative sources, but first of all, we'd have to be able to mine here, which is very, very difficult to do for policy reasons and regulatory reasons. And second of all, we would need a long-term industrial strategy to help build up some of the processing and refining.
Right. Now, so the Trump administration, there was a recent executive order that focused on critical minerals and building out our alternative access away from China. Are you seeing progress there? Are you seeing the right step forwards in that, or and if not, what other steps can be taken?
I haven't seen much progress. So there needs to be both steady demand, end use demand, and that really comes from not the military. It comes from the military a bit, but it comes from the electric vehicle supply chain. It comes from semiconductors. It comes from the electronics industry, to some extent the auto industry. So you would need a steady market signal that there's going to be demand if companies in the United States and in other friendly countries were to start mining and building up a processing capability. So there would need to be demand and offtake agreements over the long term. Perhaps DoD could backstop some of that. That hasn't really happened. The second would be on the supply side. You need to change policy in the United States. So there would have to be exceptions that certainly people concerned with environmental policy wouldn't like. There'd have to be exceptions to things like the National Environmental Policy Act. And that wasn't something that the Biden administration was willing to do. Now, I would say that sure, there will be environmental objections to this, but we would still do it in a much cleaner fashion here than it's being done elsewhere. So the option would be do it in a cleaner fashion in advanced industrial countries that have good environmental protections, or continue to get it from elsewhere without concern to environmental issues. So you need both the supply and the demand. The supply, would require changing in regulatory and legal processes such that there could be supply and there could be the capacity built here and the mining done here. And then the demand side, you need to show companies and investors that there's going to be a lot of demand.
Right. This all sounds like it's going to take quite some time. Am I correct?
Yes.
Well,
it will take some time. Now, you could send, there are certain market signals you could send that show the market that China is not going to be dominant over the short term. So if the U.S. made a serious attempt to change its its laws on mining. That would be a very big, and it'd have to be an actual legal legislative change. It couldn't be an executive order, because nobody's going to start mining or investing in mines if it's a policy that can be changed by executive order from one administration to another. That would be a major market signal, right? And so while we wouldn't actually have the refining or mining capacity for a number of years, it would demonstrate in this kind of ongoing back tit for tat on economics that China is not going to remain in that position forever.
Right. Well, then, any final thoughts on where we're going with critical mineral competition?
Yeah, I mean, so I would, I am, much, I'm much more oriented towards free market policies. But when it comes to certain things, semiconductors, that we just can't, we can't live without, and we can't be dependent on an adversary for, I think a comprehensive industrial government intervention is necessary, as light a touch as possible, regulatory changes, policy changes, certain industrial subsidies, for a time, modeled after the semiconductor policy that both did export controls as well as industrial policy. So I think that's going to be needed, but in very few industries, I would say, really in the industries that are critical for national security and where dependencies are dangerous to our economic and national security. And it would have to be done. Tariffs by themselves are not going to do it. So you can't enact tariffs on something and then not have an alternative. That doesn't work. So tariffs can be a tool, but they have to be a tool and a comprehensive strategy at very targeted industries.
Right. Well, Dan, thank you for sharing your insights. We shall see where this all goes in the next few months, and I'm sure we'll be talking again.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.